Hello. Okay. Good afternoon and namaste on behalf of USAID's South Asia Regional Energy Partnership or SAREP program to all dignitaries and colleagues gathered here today for the launch of our knowledge product and invite to renewables growth in India. Through this resource, SAREP seeks to aid the renewable energy industry on this novel financing instrument called InVIT or Infrastructure Investment Trust. We hope that this knowledge resource meaningfully contributes to India's journey of financing its renewable energy goal of 500 gigawatts by 2030. Needless to say, this handbook has been made possible with the kind guidance of the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, discussions with India's RE industry, and the support of USAID. Today's program is divided into two parts, separated by a tea break. The first part will see the InVIT book launch, and the second comprises a panel discussion with eminent industry speakers. This program is being live streamed on SAREP's social media handles. Okay, without much ado, let's kickstart the proceedings for the day. We are delighted to have in our midst and welcome to this event Shri Dinesh Jagdale, Joint Secretary at MNRE. Please join me in welcoming Mr. John Smith-Sreen, Director, Indo-Pacific Office, USAID India. Please come to the dais, to the stage. A warm welcome to Mr. Anurag Mishra, Senior Clean Energy Specialist at USAID India for his on the stage. And last but not the least, let's welcome Dr. Gaurav Bhatiyani, SAREP's Chief of Party. And okay, and please join me in welcoming Mr. Manish Gupta from the Indian Railways to the stage. I think I'll invite John Smith-Sreen. So now let's begin. I invite Mr. John Smith-Sreen to deliver his opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Namaste. We were just joking on the way in with Namrata that this is the first in-person event that we've held under our South Asia Regional Energy Partnership. So wonderful to be here in person with you all. The technology that we've all been relying on over the past couple of years during the pandemic is fabulous, and it's allowed us to keep engaged with each other. But it's so much nicer to be face-to-face among friends and colleagues. So wanted to welcome everyone from government, private sector, financial institutions, development partners who are joining us today. Joint Secretary, great to see you in person. Thanks for your leadership in taking renewable energy cooperation forward in India. Manish, good to see you, and our partnership with the railways that continues to be sound. I've been coming to India now for close to half a century, and I've had the distinct pleasure of living and working in your beautiful country for close to 14 years now. I can tell you the India-US partnership is very strong today. We saw that reflected just last week in the Leaders Summit among the Quad nations in Tokyo, Australia, India, Japan, and the United States, with a further commitment to work together on clean energy and climate, among other partnerships, and the launch of a new mechanism called the Quad Climate Change, Adaptation, and Mitigation Package. And I'm sure we'll all be hearing more about that in the weeks and months to come. The United States welcomes the opportunity to collaborate with other countries and with other institutions in support of India's climate ambitions. For example, we recently launched our collaboration with the G7 countries in support of a just energy transition partnership with India. And an overview of this new JETP partnership was shared with the government, again, just last week on May 25th. As you all know, South Asia is among the fastest growing regions in the world, and the United States recognizes India's strategic importance and the leading role of this country in promoting a free, open, prosperous, connected, secure, and resilient Indo-Pacific. Given South Asia's rapid growth and increasing aspirations, estimates show that the region needs to invest approximately 8% of its annual GDP in infrastructure to meet the growing demands. India's estimated investment requirement alone comes to over $300 billion. About 50% of these projected investments will be focused on the power sector and power-related projects. India's energy sector is experiencing a rapid transition, and the trajectory is quite positive. For example, over the past 8 years, India has had the highest growth in renewable energy among all countries in the world. Renewable energy capacity, including large hydro, has doubled, and solar energy capacity has increased by nearly 20-fold, with the costs reducing significantly. Strong fiscal support and timely policy interventions from the government of India continue to play an important role in accelerating this growth. The growth has been supported equally by a large amount of domestic and global capital, both in the form of debt and equity invested in renewable energy. And the investor base has increased as various actors gained a better understanding of what renewables are all about, the future trajectory, and the risk-return dynamics. The challenges, however, remain significant. India's target of 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel by 2030 will require large sums of capital in a relatively short period of time, roughly 4 to 5 current investments in renewable energy. To bridge this gap, innovative financial instruments must be developed and must be deployed to bring long-term capital at attractive rates, to attract new sources of investors, and to take advantage of the current installed 100-plus gigawatts capacity of renewable energy. Infrastructure Investment Trust, InVITs, which we'll be speaking about at length today, is one such instrument. India has had some recent success in using InVITs, notably by Power Grid and the National Highways Authority of India, the latter which raised approximately $1 billion, about rupees 8,000 crore, for 5 projects by employing InVITs. Following this initial success, the government of India is exploring using InVITs for railways, shipping, gas pipelines, and other sectors as part of the rupees 6 trillion national monetization pipeline. Amendments to the regulations governing InVITs have also helped improve investor participation and confidence, and increased liquidity. In conclusion, the market for InVITs is still at a formative stage in India and is evolving, but shows great potential as an attractive investment enabler. Today's workshop will showcase an InVIT guide, conceptualized and developed by USAID's South Asia Regional Energy Partnership, SARP. The handbook describes the benefits of InVITs, their structural and regulatory requirements, and a step-by-step process for issuing them. The guide also identifies different financial opportunities presented by InVITs and how to unlock resources required
for further financing India's clean energy sector. I'm excited to hear the thoughts of our experienced guests on this subject, and I hope that our partnership under SARUP contributes to an even faster acceleration of renewable energy in India and throughout South Asia. Dhanyavad, and we look forward to a successful workshop.
May I now invite Anurag Mishra, USAID's Senior Clean Energy Specialist, to please give his remarks.
Thank you, Anindya, and good afternoon, everyone. One of the major objectives of this initiative, South Asia Regional Partnership, or SAREP, is to really look at expanding the role of private sector investment and enhancing both domestic and international finance to drive clean energy transition in India as well as across South Asia. SAREP is also focused on improving procurement processes, enabling new PPP structures, and also improve the bankability of clean energy projects to drive better investment opportunities for the private sector to achieve renewables investment. So the first is to look into the existing structures and how we can further enhance the role of those existing structures. Looking at green bonds market, we have good experience. There's a lot of potential to go forward. Infrastructure debt funds is another one. And the newly established coming up National Bank for Infrastructure Development could also play an important role. On the newer ideas, we are looking at concepts like InVITs, which we'll discuss today, but also alternate investment funds, credit guarantees, new PPP models, as well as other kind of blended finance. I'm really pleased to mention that USAID, as part of our earlier engagement with MNRE, we were able to really bring the idea of green bonds in the country early in 2013-14, when we just kind of launching and expanding the renewables journey in the country, and there was no experience of these kind of structures in the country. And through that intervention, we were able to work with a number of partners, do some of the initial issuance, and now we see this is almost a $30 billion market and still growing. And we want to use a similar way of providing technical assistance for newer investment opportunities through innovative instruments, and InVITs is one such one. As we go forward, the purpose of today's kind of a meeting and workshop is to really analyze the role of InVITs, what they can provide in terms of India's infrastructure development, but also specific to the renewable energy. And we are really pleased to have Mr. Dinesh Jagdale today and Manishi here, our esteemed panelists, to really share their experience in issuing InVITs and also the challenges they face in doing this. We see that InVITs really builds on the global experience. It's not something unique and kind of completely new. It's maybe new for the Indian market or for the renewable energy sector, but it has been there in the form of yieldcos in other countries. There are kind of a similar structures in Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, with significant investment drawn from this. A specific example of that is the use of InVITs for the real estate sector in the US, where there's a huge investment which has come from REITs, which is the form of InVITs for the real estate sector. And almost REIT was like 96% of the total real estate market cap. So you can imagine how much of investment have been coming from these kind of structures for that sector. And similar way, we can look at renewables and InVITs for India. So compared to the conventional forms of financing, I know we are looking for innovative ideas which can give us advantages in terms of high dividend paying for the investor class, also looking at from the developer side, long-term capital, cheaper long-term capital for this. And InVITs really kind of fit into that kind of a thing. In Indian context, we have seen that InVITs over the time are gaining more and more traction. We have seen its use in other infrastructure areas, and now the power sector, and more recently in the renewable space, we have some examples of that. And there is a huge opportunity to going forward on this. While we know there are certain limitations and challenges with InVITs for the renewable energy sector, we like to really discuss today what are the issues, what are the benefits, and are there ways we can kind of address some of those issues and challenges, hearing from our experts, but also gaining from the expertise available in this room. And the purpose of today's meeting, starting with the launch of this handbook, which really provides the current status of play, provide all the information about what are the different steps required to issue an InVIT. It also captures some of the case studies from the Indian market. So with that, I'm really kind of pleased to now invite all the dignitaries here and request them to release the handbook to everyone, and also invite two of the authors, Namrata and Mayank, to come on the dais. Please join us here.
So we are delighted that our handbook, this knowledge product, is unveiled. Thank you, dignitaries. May I now please invite Mr. Manish Gupta from the Indian Railways for his remarks.
Good afternoon. My friend and colleague, Mr. Jagdale, John, Anurag ji, Gaurav ji, friends. I was not supposed to be sitting here. I had come to be a part of that gallery. So it is a extempore type of a item for me. But I was really excited and wanted to be a part of this event. And so that is why, even with some constraints, I was rather forced, and I was I have come here. I have to rush back because of some urgent meeting which has come back. But all the more, I would be taking inputs from Namrata later, although I wanted to be a part of this. InVITs as such is a innovative concept, and with Indian Railways, like we intend to be a net zero emitter by 2030. So we are also finding innovative ways that how we can make our strategies to achieve this goal. And obviously in that endeavor, the procurement of renewables means the renewable energy becomes the most important element of our strategy. And in this framework, whatever innovative mechanisms that the developers or the manufacturers get to deliver the product will help us also in achieving our targets, the country's targets. So frankly, I was very excited understanding this concept, and I have some ideas, but definitely I also wanted to understand how we can take it forward. Looking forward to understanding it more. Thank you very much.
Manish sir, we thank you wholeheartedly for your remarks and for joining us today. We understand you have a busy schedule and you won't be able to stay for the entire event. We value partnership with Indian Railways and are sure that InVITs will play a key role in meeting the 2030 net zero energy goals for Indian Railways. Thank you very much for your remarks again. And now may I please invite Shri Jagdale for his remarks.
Thank you. Very good afternoon, John. The person who is leading the Indian Railways towards net zero by 2030. I value the coming here and gracing this occasion as well. Anurag and Gaurav. Ladies and gentlemen, it's apologies for my bad throat today, but it's still a very important event for all of us to come here in person, physically being a part of this event and trying to see what it unveils in for all of us as we embrace the decade of action, as we move towards the new era of energy transition. We all speak about decarbonization. We all speak about green and clean energy transition. We all look at various kinds of technologies that will enable and aid us towards meeting the 2030 agenda or even beyond. For India, as you all know, we have the Honorable Prime Minister in the COP26 declared that we will go for net zero by 2070. We enhanced our target to be further ambitious to become to almost install 500 gigawatt of non-fossil based electric capacities by 2030. So it's all challenging. And the real raw material that is required to achieve this is the finance. While the community here has already been looking at various kinds of innovative methods of utilizing, borrowing, raising capital, hats off to the efforts of the entire sector, RE sector, to bring Indian RE domain, to bring India's RE vision on the world map, and taking us what we were in 2015, in what are we in 2022, it's almost tripled from a mere 35 gigawatt of installed capacity as end of 2014. We are almost close to 158 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity. Obviously, this includes the large hydro as well. So, as far as the commitments are concerned, they are large, they are ambitious. But the intent of the ministry and the government of India is to make sure that we together, through the international cooperation, through the value of partnerships, through the experiences that others have gained, acknowledging that and then taking them along with us to the forward in the path of renewable energy. That's the way we have embraced and tried to now further tie up with various countries, United States being one of the most prominent partners that we value for in terms of the various programs that we have been doing. USAID is, since my last 2.5 years in the ministry, I see one of the very enabled program, very impactful program through USAID in various categories, energy access, energy planning, and obviously trying to be with the developer on ground, making some good regulatory practices, bringing in some kind of innovative ideas onto the ground. And then today's InVIT handbook. I had got a chance to glance through it yesterday. And I appreciate all the authors sitting here because the language used, the compilations, the targets, the pictorials are very impactful. I think you catch in the first read itself, you get a lot of information. So I am sure the entire gathering and the entire fraternity of India will be very helpful, will gather a lot of knowledge and insights about InVITs. Now, if we really look at, as I mentioned, 150 gigawatt and going beyond, I think the targets are extremely ambitious. So there will be technologies that we will have to adopt. Some are mature enough to go in a different path, go in a very fast track mode, but there will be technologies which we will have to handhold. And I think that we need to do a differentiation between what is matured and what is really coming up as a new age technologies. To mark a few, I think in order to go towards that 500 gigawatt of number and to achieve that, we will have to adopt each and every unit, each of every renewable energy source that we can. And India is blessed with enough raw material that is sourced to have, whether it's sun or whether it's wind, and hydro as well. But looking at what sun and wind provides, we'll have to devise new business models. We'll have to move from the invariable or the variable power to a firm power so that the base load is met, also shifted from the conventional fossil fuels to more and more RE. Therefore, storage will be important. While we are looking at a very ambitious target of wind energy, offshore becomes critical. And while we are doing very, very ambitious solar targets of 280 to 300 gigawatts by end of this decade, I think various business models along with storage, whether it's floating solar, whether it's, and we are doing a lot on decentralized as well, what kind of supply chain, technology improvements, manufacturing, and various other efficiency improvement programs are possible in solar. So we'll have to all evolve on that. And therefore, I think there will be some kind of differentiation that is required, even during financing for those technologies which need support for a finite period, and those which have already gathered sufficient maturity to stand alone and still progress. For the energy transition, as I say, I think to be very successful, two things which I believe are important. One is affordability, and second is the environmental compatibility with innovative and smart climate action. Now, the preliminary estimates that we had done based on the 450 gigawatt, we had estimated that just to add on the renewable energy capacities, just the generating capacities, the total financing requirement will be more than 17 lakh crores for what we had achieved and what we are going to achieve. So it's a huge quantum. This doesn't even take into consideration the transmission requirements. This will be over and above that. So this is just a number. I think while we go down the line, there will be certain innovative changes that can happen, which we may not know today. But then this ballpark figure number is something which we'll have to work on. And as this expands and as this market expands from here on, the innovative concepts of finance will come into limelight. We'll have to expand our investor base for renewable assets, free of project capital for the development of new projects. We'll mobilize both domestic and foreign sources of private capital, particularly among the institutional investors. But we have been, I think Indian regulatory regime has been robust enough to attract the who's who in the financial domain. We have every country and every equity fund, whether it's from US or Europeans or others, if they have their presence in India. We'll also need to look at different de-risking instruments, transaction enablers, and innovative financial structures, as I said, that will look for investments into renewable projects. For the new technologies, I think this focus should be on optimizing the limited public finance and development finance to help leverage the private sector finance and financing models that can be used to create early market for nascent technologies. So attracting investments from institutional investors is, according to me, will be the key to achieve the scale of investments that's necessary. And the book that we are releasing today, or the topic of discussion, InVITs, will have a very major role to play. I see some of the industry leaders who have already seen this, tested this, and are now progressing into a second phase of growth. I really applaud them for taking the early initiatives and bringing them the new ideas that we all would like to look in much more detail. As in one of the chapters it says, the value of the idea is in using it. So let's all use the ideas that are being presented today. I look forward to the deliberations. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank Thank you, sir, for your kind address. I now invite SAREP's DCOP, Deputy Chief of Party, Ms. Namrata Mukherjee, for sharing more details on the InVIT handbook.
Thanks a lot, Anindya. Very good afternoon to our esteemed guests on the dais and to all of you who are present here today. It's amazing to see and feel this in-person event after such a long time, so it feels great. What I want to do today is to basically take you through a few sections of the handbook and what it talks about, to give you a little flavor of the why, what, and how of InVITs. And we definitely would like you to stay back after the tea break because we have an esteemed panel of experienced practitioners who are going to give you a little more insights into the real benefits and challenges of using this instrument. So with that, let me just begin. If I can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I think Honorable JS has already spoken about the story here. It's a great matter of pride to look at the way we have reached this story of renewable energy in our country. And we have 158 gigawatts of renewable energy, including large hydropower, already installed in the country. What I just want to highlight from this particular slide is that average capacity addition of 8 to 10 gigawatts has happened in the last 7 to 10 years. The tariff levels, I think we are all now aware of with regard to solar and wind, the way the tariffs have come down because of our very competitive framework which exists, and the cumulative investments of $38 billion in wind and solar that the sector has attracted in the last 10 years. Please move to the next slide. So let me begin by why are we talking about this mystery box of infrastructure investment trusts. Once again, I think we've already heard about the large target that we as a country have set ourselves for, which is the 500 gigawatts non-fossil capacity that we want to achieve by 2030. This will definitely require an orbital shift from the current levels because what we saw in the previous slide with regard to an average pace of capacity addition that has happened in renewable energy will pick up. We are estimating an annual addition requirement of 40 to 45 gigawatts in comparison to what we have reached so far. This will require a cumulative investment require of $167 billion. I am taking into account incremental capacity addition of wind and solar in this number, which will entail a debt of $125 billion and equity requirement of $42 billion. Just to give this a little bit in perspective, the exposure of banks and financial institutions to the power sector so far is $168 billion. So you can put together the numbers to look at, the quantum of financing that will be required in the next, 8 to 10 years to make this clean energy transition very smooth. And there may be a possibility that the traditional means of financing may not be adequate to, finance the huge financing requirement. And hence, there is a need to look at different types of mechanisms that exist to facilitate financing of clean energy projects. Infrastructure investment trusts basically are one such mechanism which allow for recycling of capital over short intervals and therefore enable developers to subsequently reinvest these in new and greenfield projects. If you can please move to the next. Let me just, pause and talk about what are, InVITs. InVITs are basically a form of a pooled investment vehicle. It is, to make it simple, it's like a mutual fund in which an individual or an institution buys units. It is, in simple terms, a way of pooling funds to invest in an asset, and it resembles a hybrid of a debt and equity instrument. It is structured to provide low risk, regular cash flows, which is similar to a debt instrument. And at the same time, it also provides an upside potential, which is similar to an equity instrument. As Anurag also mentioned, InVITs typically are not new. Of course, the terminology sounds new, the Infrastructure Investment Trust, because it is a very focused, India-specific instrument. But if you look at the resemblances, it is very similar to a yieldco model, which exists for many decades in international markets and developed financial markets like in the US, UK, Australia, Singapore, and Hong Kong. In fact, it began in the form of REITs, the real estate infrastructure trusts, which were very popular in US and the Singapore, Hong Kong markets. If you look at global experience, there have been 400 listings of similar instruments, which account for $1.5 trillion of market capitalization. What is interesting to note is that the sectors that an instrument like InVIT focuses on is long-term infrastructure assets, roads, power generation facilities, telecom towers, power transmission infrastructure, warehouses, ports, gas pipeline, and you name it. Why is this set of sectors attractive for an InVIT kind of an instrument? Is because it offers investors stable income and growth over the long-term life of the asset. Our estimates indicate that InVITs can raise more than $100 billion over the next 5 to 6 years, which is about 4 times the current assets under management in the InVITs. Please, next slide. Let me just spend a little time on the structure of an InVIT and how it operates. If you look at this diagram which has been provided, there are 4 entities which are critical in any kind of an InVIT structure. There is a sponsor, which is responsible for setting up the InVIT and which is also responsible for transferring the initial portfolio of assets into the InVIT trust. There is a second entity which plays a very critical role, which is the trustee, which holds the InVIT assets in trust for the benefits of the unit holders in accordance with SEBI regulations. There is a third very important entity which is called the investment manager, which is an entity which essentially manages the assets, the investment, and undertakes the operational activities. And there is a fourth entity which is the project manager, which is responsible for execution and management of the projects, essentially operation and maintenance of the projects. Typically, this must be the sponsor or its associate for the first 3 years, because that is the entity who understands most about these assets which are getting moved into the trust vehicle. So you can see the flow. The ownership basically is from the sponsor to the InVIT trust, and then to the SPVs where the infrastructure assets reside. And for all the transactions which take place between the project manager, investment manager, or the trustee, there is a consequential fee which is involved, which comes from the trust. If you can please move to the next. Let me spend a little time now on the key features of InVITs. And this is an important slide. It is a regulated instrument which can be only launched when they are in compliance with the SEBI regulations. A detailed description of the InVIT legal and regulatory framework and the consequent regulations can be found in the handbook. But I will just give you a little insight into 5 or 6 points that one should keep into account. One is the first feature is that 80% of investment of InVITs is in operational assets. The balance 20% can be in under construction assets. And the value of assets which is held by the InVIT should be greater than $67 million, which is more than 500 crores of Indian rupees. The second point which is important is that 90% of the net distributable cash flow is distributed to the unit investors. This is a SEBI regulation mandate. And this distribution typically happens twice in a year for publicly listed InVITs and once in the year for privately listed InVITs. There is a third requirement where there is sponsor restrictions, that the sponsor can hold a minimum of 15% units, which is issued by the InVIT, and there is a lock-in period of 3 years from the date of issuance for the sponsor. There is another requirement of maximum permissible holdings by an investor in an InVIT, which is typically 25%. The mode of issuance of an InVIT is basically 2 types, which helps in value unlocking. One is the publicly listed InVITs, and the second is privately held InVITs. The privately held can be either listed or unlisted, InVITs. All the units that are held privately is held by a limited number of individuals or institutions. There is also a unique feature of debt issuance where InVITs listed on a stock exchange, basically the publicly listed InVITs, can issue debt securities. This is allowed for a consolidated borrowing of up to 49% of the asset value. It can increase to 70% based on certain fulfillment of criteria that are specified by SEBI. And one of the most important features of InVITs is that a credit rating of a AAA is a must before the launch of an InVIT. If we can please move to the next. I think John has also covered some aspects about the major InVITs in India. If we look at, till the current April 2022, there are 19 InVITs which have been registered in India with SEBI till date. If I just look at the trajectory, there has been around cumulative investments of $, close to 20 billion, which were raised through InVITs. And one can notice that a CAGR of more than 100%, in terms of InVIT issuances were achieved in the last 4 to 5 years. In fact, if we just consider FY20 and FY21 itself, there were 6 to 7 InVIT issuances, and the most predominant ones being the NHAI, PGCIL, and the Virescent, the first renewable energy InVIT, which was launched last year. Next, please. So what benefits does an infrastructure investment trust have for developers and investors? We will be talking about this in detail in our panel discussion, but just for all of your sake, for developers, it allows an access to a large pool of capital. It allows constant flow of capital, which can be used, to recycle in new greenfield assets. It allows and provides the ability to raise money without the need to list in a lot of instances. It also helps in reducing the debt burden. For investors, it is a platform for investment, of course, in renewable energy projects. It allows for access to secured assets with low volatility. It provides long-term attractive investment. It is a tax-efficient structure, and it allows control over assets. Next, please. Some challenges which, one will also hear from practitioners is typically the credit rating of AAA before the launch of an InVIT is a little bit of a, question mark for a lot of projects, because the counterparty is DISCOMs in a lot of instances. So this becomes a little bit of a challenge for developers looking at using this instrument. Policy regulatory uncertainty in the past, not in all cases, but in some instances where there have been, questions around PPA renegotiation. So investors have this big concern in their mind. Limited growth potential of operational assets. By this, I mean, the visibility of the pipeline of assets which can be available, for an InVIT investor becomes very important. The regulatory framework of InVITs, because since 2014, one has seen several regulatory changes which has taken place in this framework, predominantly again led by, industry, those who have used these instruments. So we can say it is emerging, and it has somewhere now reached a little bit of a stable place. And requirement of scale, because InVIT issue size is very critical to attract large investors. Next, please. I'm going to wrap up in the next 2 slides. This is now the part where it comes to how, how do I, okay, so there is a why, there is a what, then, but how do I, if I'm interested in this instrument, how do I set up an InVIT? It may be a little difficult to read through the slide, but the handbook, when you see it, will have all the steps which provides you the process through which you can set up an InVIT. What we've done is just put it in a diagrammatic flow, but it is the SEBI regulations which guide you to put together an InVIT structure. It essentially starts with the trust formation by the sponsor, and then the trustee appoints an investment manager. There is a necessary documentation that is required between the trustee, the investment manager, and the sponsor. And that follows with the appointment of the project manager and the registration of the trust as an InVIT. There can be 2 modes of issuance. One can be a public mode, the other can be a private issuance. And after the public issuance, there is a standard process of filing with SEBI, and then going ahead with the red herring prospectus and the public offer after that. Next, please. So I just want to leave you with a few key considerations to have in your mind and thought, and especially when we get into the moderated panel discussion, for you to maybe ask practitioners as well. One key consideration is, achieving the AAA rating for InVITs. There is a need for a strong PPA counterparty. For instance, in renewable energy projects, SECI definitely plays this role. And also the structuring of the InVIT plays a very important role in this case. What should be the optimal debt levels? Second aspect which needs to be kept in mind is the adequate size of the initial portfolio. We have observed that in the past InVIT, issuances, equity sizes have been around INR 2,000 to 3,000 crore in infrastructure projects. And for this aspect, it is crucial, to have, a particular optimal size of renewable energy portfolio. Typically, a 1 gigawatt portfolio is a good size to attract large investors. And we have seen current renewable energy players like Renew, Greenco, Adani, Tata Power, Acme, Azure, NTPC can all play a very big role in utilizing this instrument as they transition towards their decarbonization, targets. Also, what is very important when you're looking at an InVIT is the future growth prospects. InVIT portfolio has limited growth potential and dependent on future acquisitions. So you need to have a very healthy pipeline to make sure the InVIT is constantly is in the process of acquiring new assets. And therefore, the related point about the pipeline of assets, be it transmission, be it renewable energy, be it roads, it's very important for the investor to have a visibility of the pipeline of these assets. Next, please. And three other considerations: the investment structure plays a very important role. Typically, for an InVIT, SPV-like structures are preferable for asset development. Adopting the right InVIT structure, so should it be a public or a private listed InVIT, should it at all be listed, or would you as a developer want it to remain as unlisted as an instrument? Those possibilities exist. And then finally, selecting the right investors. Are you looking at institutional, pension funds, retail, investors? Those will all define the type of, InVIT raise that you will look at. So I will pause here. The InVIT handbook has a lot more details on these aspects. This was more of a trailer just to give you a little visibility on what the handbook captures. So thank you for this, and we hope to have a little more engaging discussions in the panel discussion after the break. I'll hand it back to Anindya. Thank you.
Thank you, Namrata, for that very detailed, informative session. And now we have in our midst former Additional Secretary from the MNRE, Shri Aniruddha Kumar, and I'd like to invite him for his remarks.
Very good afternoon to all of you, including my very dear friend Dinesh Jagdale and the entire USAID team. I have a very long history of working with the USAID since my days of urban development. My association with USAID lasts since 2005, when I was working with USAID on JNNURM, Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission. And I have very fond memories of working with USAID, and they are one of the most effective multilateral donor organization. Let me be very honest with you, because I don't mince my word. I'm known to be not mincing my word. So USAID has done model municipal accounting manual for us in urban development. USAID does in the dematerialization of the entire stock exchanges. You are aware if some senior guys are here. So the entire dematerialization of stock exchanges has been done with the help of USAID. Model municipal accounting manual is done by USAID. So they do work on ground. They do work on ground. And today's interest is very, very interesting, very, very contemporaneous. All of us know that renewable is a necessity of life if we want to leave this planet safe for our future generation. People say that, okay, 2 degrees centigrade is the outer limit in the temperature rise as compared to the prehistoric, pre-industrial days. But I think now it is almost certain that it will be impossible to achieve 1.5 degree, which is the aspirational target, if the business as usual continues. We have to have some disruptive technologies, some disruptive financial engineering, some disruptive innovations in grid integration of renewables, if we at all want to achieve that macro objective of containing the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees centigrade as compared to the prehistoric eras. Next sentence which I am going to say may be not very pleasant to some of the people present here in this room. So far as walk the talk is concerned, the implementation of Kyoto Protocol is concerned, I think India has the best track record. In Kyoto, we gave commitments that we will have 33 to 35% reduction in the intensity of our carbon reduction in the carbon intensity of our GDP. We are well ahead of that. We said that we will have 175 gigawatt. We are well ahead of the target. So we are ahead of all the targets. So probably the metal lies on the developed nations who have the money, who have the technology, and the country like India who has the ambition and who are willing to embrace the technology, who are willing to use that money for the betterment of their own country, for the betterment of the planet. So we have to collaborate very strongly with very clear intention. And I'm really very optimistic that with the recent dispensation, with the change in the recent dispensation in the global political climate, the consensus is emerging on phasing out coal, and US and Europe are again coming back to the table to discuss how to cut down the carbon emission reduction. So that's the general background. Now let me come to the very specific subject of InVITs and renewables. Yes. InVITs are a fantastic financial instrument for promoting any technology or project which has a predictable stream of revenue. Like we have so many examples of InVITs in India. Let me be very frank, I have put more than 50% of my retirement saving. I am now retired. I have put 50% of my retirement savings into InVITs. So that shows my conviction and confidence in this instrument. And I have been advising all my friends, all my family members to put their savings into the InVITs, which gives you a assured return of income over a period of 25-30 years. Only today I had a talk with my brother and friend that they are better than treasury bonds. IndiGrid InVIT or Power Grid InVIT has a better visibility of giving you return or better safety than the treasury bonds issued by the government of India. Indian rating may go down, but I am pretty sure that IndiGrid rating will not go down or Power Grid InVIT rating will not go down. But the streams are revenue is assured by the DISCOMs, by the regulation. DISCOMs cannot default on payment. Payment will come directly to the InVIT or the transmission operating company. So it's a 0-0-0 risk game as far as the investors are concerned. So, but here if we want to popularize InVIT, give me the time limit. Because I am very passionate about this subject. Do we have any time limit? Couple of minutes. So, most popular InVITs are Power Grid, IndiGrid, and to some extent Brookfield, then KKR, and then IRB. But most secure of them is transmission lines InVITs, because their return are guaranteed by the regulation, by the grid code. The DISCOMs cannot default on payments. So these are the two plus points. But in the case of renewable, there are some problems. Payments are not guaranteed by the DISCOMs. There can be delay in the payment by the DISCOMs. Similarly, in case of renewables, there is always a dispute about the curtailment. Renewable is an unfirm power. When a DISCOM is saddled with surplus generation of energy, what do? It's very easy to say, very easy to formulate a grid code. It is a must run. This is how, if the renewable power is curtailed, the revenue will be shared or the losses will be shared. But believe me, as long as we are not able to resolve this problem of smooth integration of renewable energy in the grid without destabilizing the grid, we will continue to face this problem. The person sitting at the head of the DISCOM or doing the load management, 24/7 load management center will have this problem. How does he manage the grid? If suddenly there is a 4,000 megawatt of wind coming from Tamil Nadu and there is no demand, what does he do? Either he cuts down the thermal plants or nuclear plants or hydro plants, or what does he do? What is the choice with him? So he will willy-nilly, ethically, unethically resort to the curtailment. So when we design an InVIT for renewable power plants, we must keep these two things in mind. That, okay, how do we avoid curtailment at the time of surplus? And second thing, how do we make sure the payments from DISCOMs? But the moment payment from DISCOMs are delayed, that will shake the confidence of the investors in the InVITs, which is not the case in the case of Power Grid InVIT or IndiGrid. So these are the two major disadvantages, or I'll say distinctions. I will not call them disadvantages. These are the two major distinctions or challenges you should address while designing InVIT for renewable energy assets. And thankfully, India is endowed with massive renewable energy potential, 700 gigawatt of solar, and Dayanand can tell better about the wind. They claim 700 gigawatt, but probably most conservatively, even 250 gigawatt is easily exploitable at commercially viable rate. So we have plenty of renewable. Only thing is that we need support of the developed world. We need support of the global labs like Lawrence Berkeley Lab, which did the study greening the grid for us on behalf of USAID. Then this energy mix for 2030 was done by us with absolutely, let me be very honest with you, we had no capability as compared to Lawrence Berkeley. We did it on Excel, we were given a challenge. Masayoshi-san, the SoftBank chairman, came to India and he proposed to set up 1200 gigawatt of solar in India. The proposal came to my table. Anirudh, what is the possibility and feasibility of this? And within 2 days, burning midnight oil, I could prove to him as well as his team that it is just not possible to integrate more than 450 gigawatt of solar in India unless there are some disruptive changes in the grid management or storage technology. So these are the things we need to collaborate with the world, and these are the challenges. These, in my opinion, the InVITs in renewable will not command as much premium as those in the transmission sector because of the two inherent risks. Delay in payment by the DISCOMs, which is already 1,50,000 crore as on date, and the curtailment. We have huge litigation with Andhra government about curtailment. Dinesh would vouch for it. We have ongoing litigation with Andhra government about the illegal, though grid code formulation has been made, under what circumstances DISCOM can curtail the power, but it continues. And in public policy, you have to take it with a pinch of salt. Because anybody which is hitting somebody's pocket, he has to ensure payment to the salary of his employees at the end of the month. He has to ensure payment of the cost of coal at the end of the month. So he has to make two ends meet. So despite of all grid code regulation, he will indulge in curtailment. So we have to find a very nuanced solution which takes care of the interest of all the stakeholders. And this is a fantastic instrument. There are some people who are good in installing the plants or making the plants or constructing the plant. They are not happy with 6%, 7% ROI. And there are people, old people like me, who doesn't want to work hard and be happy with 7% ROI on their capital. So it's a mutually beneficial fit. Like, okay, you are expert, you are energetic, you have the technology, you build the plant, get it commissioned, get the PPA, and get out at 20% ROE. Now, I am happy to take this plant at 8% ROE. So, I get my premium. I am happy to earn 8% on my return. So, definitely the person who has built the plant, who has constructed the plant, in 18 months is the time for given for implementation, 24 months, he can make 40% ROI. So it is a win-win for all of them. The guy who is expert in construction, he makes 40% ROI. The people like us, pension funds, who are happy with 7% ROI, 8% ROI, for them there is no better instrument than this. So this is such a wonderful win-win strategic fit, but we have to put our head together how to make it workable like it has worked in infrastructure sector or highway sector. So these are my observations, and we have to. I'll be very happy that if USAID can come out with some solid solution. I am now, what do I say in the language of Delhi, Vela. My services are always available. I am doing freelance consulting and few arbitrations, and I am also doing consulting for Gujarat government for their Kadana PSP plant, which is basically going to supplement the renewable energy, integration of more renewable energy. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I only registered at 12 noon this evening, and I just cancelled some other engagement, rushed to this workshop because I was so keen to attend this workshop. Thank you so much, and I'll be happy to take any question from your side.
So we are equally delighted with your remarks. Thank you so much for your address. Now, before we break for tea, we would like to showcase a video on that introduces SAREP program. So could we please play that video?
South Asia has a rich cultural landscape, unique geography, and diverse population. And the economic aspirations of its over 1.5 billion citizens unite the region. However, this region, with the world's fastest expanding economy, is also tremendously vulnerable to climate change. Greater access to clean energy will help meet the region's rapid growth without compromising its natural, social and economic resources. The United States Agency for International Development, better known as USAID, is committed to working alongside its South Asian partners to help ensure a just transition from fossil-based to clean energy to drive economic growth and development. Our shared dedication to clean energy and climate action have resulted in USAID's new 5-year program, the South Asia Regional Energy Partnership, or SAREP. This initiative will improve access to affordable, reliable and sustainable energy in 6 countries: Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, the Maldives, Nepal and Sri Lanka. Over the next 5 years, SAREP will accelerate renewable energy deployment, conserve power through promoting energy efficiency, mobilize billions of dollars in investments, and train thousands of employees in the clean energy sector. SAREP will reach these goals by building regional energy markets and enhancing cross-border electricity trade for a regionally integrated grid, deploying and scaling advanced energy solutions such as renewable energy, electric vehicles and distributed energy resources, enabling high-performing modern power utilities to strengthen their transmission, system operation and distribution services, and leveraging investments through transparent best value procurement practices and innovative financing instruments. Additionally, SAREP through the South Asia Regional Energy Hub, or SARE, will facilitate dynamic collaboration, coordination and communication among its South Asian stakeholders, champion gender mainstreaming in the energy sector, and enable pollution mitigation. Further, through its $12 million partnership fund, SAREP will issue multiple grants to advance green energy solutions. And SAREP will also forge deeper energy cooperation and new partnerships in South Asia to achieve net zero targets. Now is the time to galvanize South Asia's clean energy transition. Let's work together through SAREP in empowering the region to meet urgent clean energy goals.
Thank you. Now let's break for a 15-minute tea break. And after we come back, we are going to have a scintillating discussion with industry veterans leading InVITs.
Much more than anybody else. No, you made some excellent points. I think, also introduce you to John Smith, Serene. He might remember you. He was here until 2000. He was here till 2006. Yeah. So 2001 to 2006. Yeah, he was 1 to 6. Yes, in the energy office. आपका जो you were dealing with Madhumita and
It's the same agreement. Each and every year. And our consultants are TCGI and PEDCO. TCGI, PEDCO, Lee Baker, Nebroon.
NB.
NB.
and Madhumita.
Hi, John Smith. Good to meet you. So I was wondering whether we had interacted, because I was here with Gaurav at the same time from 2001 to 6 working with USA.
I used to interact with Nebroon.
NB, of course, yeah, from our urban office.
Lee Baker.
Yeah, I remember Lee also.
And then Hitesh Redya was there.
Yeah, so Fire D.
Fire D. And Hitesh is now director NIUA. Hitesh and Chetan was also there, I guess. And then Alok Shiromani was there. Alok Shiromani was there. Alok Shiromani.
Let me share my card with you. So I
now
arrived back. I work with what's called the Indo-Pacific Office, which it's a regional program, but Sarah, six countries, but the lion's share of our efforts
Yes. Yeah, so now we are going to have new speakers. Please feel free to bring your plates to the table so that we can start on time. So welcome back. Let's kickstart today's panel discussion. Let's welcome again today's moderators, Dr. Gaurav Bhatiani, SAREP's Chief of Party, and Ms. Namrata Mukherjee, SAREP's Deputy Chief of Party, on the stage. I'm delighted to invite some really eminent speakers from the industry. First, I invite Mr. Pareen Mehta, CEO of Virescent Renewables, to the stage. Mr. Mehta oversees the finance function, specifically the M&A, corporate and project finance verticals at Virescent. CFO. Okay. So, Mr. Pareen Mehta is the CFO. Welcome, sir. Sorry, that was mispronunciation. Mr. Pareen Mehta, CFO, Virescent Infra, is here. I now invite Mr. Harsh Shah, who has been instrumental in setting up IndiGrid, India's first infrastructure investment trust in the power transmission sector, where he is the CEO and whole-time director. We are delighted to have you here, sir. Next up, we have Mr. T. Harikrishnan, DGM at IIFCL. Mr. Harikrishnan specializes in project infrastructure finance, policy, financial restructuring, resolution of stressed asset, and development banking across several sectors. And let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Samriddha Nupane, partner at Saraf & Partners. He looks after projects, energy and infrastructure practice groups, and has over a decade of experience. Welcome. So now over to Dr. Bhatiani for kickstarting this panel discussion.
Thank you, Anindya. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure once again. We had a very interesting session before tea. We heard the India perspective from Joint Secretary. We have some very ambitious targets, looking at 500 gigawatts, raising 1.7 trillion rupees. We also heard how some of the leading organizations, Indian Railways, at the micro level, are looking to take that target forward. So he spoke about the target of 2030. So relative to 2070, we have 2030 for the leading organizations. We also feel that, many of our cities, which are, the concentrated centers of energy demand and consumption, will need to take ambitious targets. And that's where, we also have a lot of finance and capital and industry concentrated. John talked a little bit about India-US relationship, how it is at peak. In fact, for FY21, US replaced or became India's highest trading partner. US is also where a lot of technologies and capital, which Joint Secretary talked about, is concentrated, and this collaboration can help us unlock some of that. And we had some very interesting remarks from Mr. Anirudh Kumar. More as a investor, he talked about institutional investors, PE, the pension funds, but also as a retail investor. So we heard multitude of perspectives. And I'm delighted to welcome our very distinguished
guests this afternoon, again representing multiple perspectives. We have colleagues from industry, we have colleagues from financial institutions, and we have legal fraternity as well here this afternoon. So the structure of the discussion today, what I would like to propose, we have roughly 60 minutes, and I'm conscious that it's a Friday afternoon or Friday evening. So what we would like to do is invite each of our distinguished guests, panelists here to briefly, make some opening remarks. If you can, take maybe 5 to 7 minutes each to, make some opening remarks, share some perspectives. You all have had experience of various kinds of financial instruments, various kinds of transactions. In particular, InVIT transactions, each of you have, in your own different ways, looked at them. So if you can share some, high-level experiences from various perspectives, and then we will take some questions both from our audience as well as some which our team have come up with. So without much ado, now let me first invite Harsh, for the opening remarks. Harsh, you can speak from there. You want to come here, whatever you think comfortable.
Is it? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining today, and thank you, USAID and SARP, to invite us. I think I've spent about 6 odd years of my life, starting from first regulations of InVIT that came out from SEBI in 2014-15, starting focused only on InVITs after that. And I would say where we are today in the roadmap of InVIT is very heartening to see. Some of the numbers that Namrata spoke about already, there is about over 2 lakh crores of assets which are owned by InVITs and REITs in the country today, across variety of asset classes, starting from a telecom tower to a transmission line to a solar power panels to fiber. So variety of assets, variety of sponsors, starting from private sector guys who started it, pure play financial owners, and government of India themselves. So it's become a very, very vibrant market since the time it started. I remember in 2014-15, we had to explain first the full form, what it stands for, and then what this animal is, and what are the considerations around it. And neither bankers, accountants, lawyers, none of them understood what we are dealing with at that time. And we spent first couple of years just harmonizing that. And second phase of the challenge that we came across was different regulators didn't understand it, or rather looked at it from their own lens. So RBI looked at it from a particular lens, IRDAI looked at it from a different lens for insurance companies, PFRDA from pension funds looked at with a different perspective. And when all of them looked at from different perspective, what happened is a particular InVIT or REIT were left high and dry to struggle in the initial phases. However, with the focus of Ministry of Finance and SEBI of continuous sponsorship, I would say in 3 years' time, a lot of things got ironed out, whether it's to do with minor changes in the regulations or financing universe, a lot of things have got ironed out. Today, I would say confidently today, if any foreign investor who wants to own an infrastructure asset in India, the first preference is that I would want to form an InVIT. We'll talk about different criteria, but logically the first preference is that we want to own it via an InVIT. And besides what we have seen today, I think I would like for a general public, including me or generally, to think of it not as an instrument, but it's like a living organism, like a company. And therefore, it is just like a better way of owning a business. A company was a particular legal structure of owning a business. InVIT is offered a little better way of owning an infrastructure business, where Government of India has been kind enough to provide certain tax advantages. That's the simple way of looking at it. At the core of it, what makes InVIT viable and attractive for investors is, one is the tax advantage with respect to dividends, and second is with respect to investors having higher rights than in a normal company. These are the only two high-level differences besides the legalities around that. And that's what has made people tremendously confident over the period of time to invest in InVITs and REITs per se. Coming to the sector, the topic of today, I think Sir was kind enough to talk about transmission InVITs, and we do believe it's a phenomenal investment. But renewables offers larger scale. See, transmission is probably 5% of the overall sector. And if we add state transcos, probably 10%. 90% of the business of the sector remains in the generation side and distribution. And as a country, we haven't been able to do something remarkably well in terms of monetizing or streamlining those part of the sector. And as Sir mentioned, I think fixing the core issue of the sector is absolutely essential, which is to do with the distribution company payment capacity. Everything else is solvable. I financed first solar power project 15 years ago when we were lenders, and unfortunately the questions have still remained the same. Who are the credible counterparties, who are not? The only thing that has leapfrogged is affordability. We finance a 15 rupee PPA. Now we are coming to 2.5. It's a phenomenal leap of technological development. For a country, it's now up to in our hands to really utilize this technological development and put together viable structure. To be honest, it's already viable. Put together the simpler contractual structure to achieve a next scale of growth for the sector, for climate change, and for our commitments. But I'm sure with the sponsorship what is there from the government on different quarters and technological development, pretty confident that we'll end up achieving that. And yes, InVITs or any other means of instrument will play a small bit of role. But at the end of the day, any financial investment, whether it's debt or IDF or InVIT, are just magnifiers of any business. When the business are doing good, they'll magnify the positive impact. On the other hand, when the business is doing bad, it'll magnify on the negative direction as well. So I think we need to fix the core of the sector that is there today. And I'm sure with that, things will fall in place in the country.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Harsh. So from transmission now, to generation, Pawan, you have been involved with the first InVIT in the renewable energy. So we would love to hear your experience. How did you come to the point of choosing InVIT, when there was no one looking at it? Please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. So, see, infrastructure as an asset class, and we look at core infrastructure, which is roads, renewables, transmission, more or less are finite life assets, or most of them are finite life assets. And the underlying thesis of any investor investing in these assets is constant cash flow. Now, Harsh mentioned that when you're looking at infrastructure investment, InVITs become your first choice. And the reason for that is because investors are looking at cash flow. Historically, we've had investments in infrastructure from financial investors. Most of them have been private companies, and few players who've tried to take the listed route. Unfortunately, there have not been too many success stories. And there are a variety of reasons for that. So from our point of view, the idea was very simple from our shareholders' point of view. Let's invest in infrastructure in asset classes, renewables being one of them, with stable, finite cash flows and predictability of cash flows. And when you say predictability, it's not only about the cash being generated, it's also about the cash being distributed. I will come to the recovery part, sir. I'll come to the recovery part. So that was the basic philosophy. Let's structure it in a manner where you can have cash flows on a regular periodic basis. And that was the whole philosophy. Now, we were the first InVIT. In fact, as we speak, we are the only dedicated renewable energy InVIT. There are a few players who are contemplating InVITs, and you should see a couple of them in the next few quarters. There were challenges. Namrata mentioned, she showed us a presentation which spoke about the requirements that are there for a renewable InVIT. Credit rating being one of them. You need a AAA credit rating. Now, there is no renewable portfolio in the country as at the portfolio level who has a AAA rating. And that became the first challenge. Now, how do you package your strategy in a manner that you first get AAA, but you also ensure that you maintain AAA? So, and the reason we could do it is because we started with an InVIT philosophy. We knew that we have to create an InVIT and grow through an InVIT. So every decision that we took was around that. Today, if a larger platform wants to convert from a corporate structure to an InVIT structure, is going to be very difficult because a lot of things have already been done. Not getting into technicality, but right from the capital structure to how their SPVs are structured, etc., and then what is the kind of leverage, etc., that they've taken on each of these assets. All those things do matter. Given we are starting bottoms up, it was an advantage. So there were challenges. We didn't have to explain the word InVIT to people because that Harsh had already done 3 years ago. But we did have to explain renewable InVIT to people. Why renewable InVIT? How will you manage cash flows? You have state PPAs. What happens? And this is from all stakeholders. I mean, when we decided on the InVIT, initially you talk to financiers. I'm not talking about equity here. I'm talking about debt financiers. They will come on the back of credit rating and credit rating agencies, people who do your independent valuation, all of those guys, all other stakeholders. So that was a struggle. But yeah, eventually we got there. And now the challenge is growth. We have a structure which is in place which can maintain our rating, but now we have to ensure that the cash flows continue to grow and our shareholders, and we are a private listed InVIT, so it's closely held, but there is enough and more growth in the sector, and you have to continuously work on a pipeline.
Thank you, Pawan. You made some very interesting points. We'll come back to them. But I want to invite Mr. T. Hari Krishnan. So you represent a big institution and also an interesting detail that, that Pawan did manage to convince you guys to be part of, their growth story. So we would love to hear your perspective, how as a very large, publicly owned financial institution, you see InVIT as part of, the clean energy transition.
So just to give a brief background about IFCL, I'm sure many of you may be aware of IFCL, but still the benefit of few who are not aware. So we are a public financial institution started by the Government of India in 2006 to encourage the PPP projects, basically into the infrastructure sector, as classified by under the RBI guidelines. So, and then main products that we have are direct lending to infra projects and takeout financing where, completed projects we can do a refinancing. So, and then around 2016, the need was felt that we need to diversify our portfolio because we found that it was more into the highway sector. And after the Golden Quadrilateral project in the early 90s and all. So, a need was felt that we need to diversify our asset classes. And then we had the NPA pressures simultaneously mounting. And then at that time, with the SEBI regulations coming in terms of InVITs, we had, there was some lack of clarity in terms of our mandate that whether we can do InVITs or not. And then simultaneously at that time, SBI had come up with its InVIT policy, PNB had come up with its policy, private banks are moving towards it. So we wanted to do InVITs, but we were constrained by the kind of mandate that we are having. So we had specifically written to Reserve Bank of India to clarify whether IFCL as an institution will be able to invest in infra bonds as well as participate in financing to InVITs. So in mid of 2021, we received the clarification from RBI that yes, we can indeed go ahead with financing for the InVITs. And in end 2021, we had taken a policy to the board, and we had come up with a detailed policy on how to go about with the financing for InVITs. After that, in early 2022, we had sanctioned our first proposal. however, which could not be taken forward because of fine-tuning of the commercials. Simultaneously, with the policy of InVITs, we had also come up with a policy for investment in bonds. So under that facility only, we had taken the opportunity to invest in Verisent. So this is about it. And then as we speak, we have a strategy meet today going on in off-site. And one of the important agenda is how to sort of increase our exposure in InVIT towards lending towards InVITs. And I can just share with you what our top management is of the view that a separate vertical has to be created. Given that InVIT loans are of high ticket size, even about 10 to 12 proposals, we can meet our yearly targets. Instead of making proposals about 200 crores, the ticket size that normally look at InVIT is about 1,000 crores minimum. So this is about it, and we are excited to be a part of the InVIT journey. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. It's lovely to hear that you got the regulatory support, you have the board approval, and you are even thinking of establishing a separate vertical within the organization. I see that this is perhaps also an opportunity where SAREP can collaborate with your institution to take forward some of these initiatives, because as you see, we are excited as you are about this institution. With that, let me invite Mr. Samridha. He is from Saraf and Partners, a legal firm, to hear a little bit, what are further policy, legal, regulatory aspects. If you can throw some light on that, that will be very, very helpful.
Sure. Thank you. At the very inception, let me just give you an introduction to the firm, right, and then I'll come to myself. So Saraf and Partners is a full-service firm. We have about 175, 180 odd practitioners, and we have about 32 odd partners, right, that look across, that work across various verticals within the firm, be it corporate practice, M&A, we have capital markets team, and I particularly, I am a part of the projects infrastructure and energy team. Within the team itself, I've sort of looked at all sorts of renewable assets, be it at the M&A stage or the developmental stage or the financing stage, and we regularly advise on clean energy projects in India. Now, having said that, a lot of it has already been said in the past as to why capital is very, very important in the RE stage, because while it was well spoken and well stated a while ago, and even stressed upon by my earlier speakers and the panelists earlier, that India has been doing relatively well when it comes to the RE space, right? And there's been major policy thrusts, either either by way of the electricity policies or the budget, right, which go on to really give more thrust to the sector in itself. But what's really missing right now, and that's probably why we're all here, is to understand where the money comes from to finance these sectors. Now, well, before the InVIT regime really came about, players would, or business houses would naturally resort to debt, right? And availability of which is limited in certain aspects. The other option was to sort of, get your equity in. And what typically happened at that time was that the business houses were sort of forced, or developers were rather forced, to sell the assets that they have in hand and then get fresh capital, which could in turn be used to develop fresh projects, right? The other, alternative solution that we used to obviously was to securitize the revenues that come out of your projects to get further capital into the system. And now with the entire InVIT regime that has sort of come about since 2014 with various amendments, favorable amendments over time, the happy thing is that developers can actually monetize the assets without actually losing those assets, right? Because they have control over those assets by passing it on to a new entity, to a trust, right? But they have control over it. I mean, it's already been spoken, by my past speakers, and also I just went through the entire handbook for a while. And it's been well laid out there, and also spoken by Namrata, that there are various benefits when it comes to this entire InVIT structure, be it for developers or investors. For developers, mostly, given that they get to monetize their assets and, they get to leverage, they get to reduce the leverage on their assets, and they get to focus on their core competencies. and the entire operational assets that you have are well taken care of by your IM and the PM, who are well more focused and the professional people who can actually take care of those assets. There are certain tax benefits that are provided. For investors specifically, this becomes a very, very attractive proposition, largely because there's certainty of payment when it comes to RE projects, largely owing to the must-run status. Although Sir said, there are certain challenges that come with the must-run status as well, and implementability thereof is sort of, a little questionable. But given the payment security mechanisms that have of late come into the entire RE mechanism, and the must-run status, and also the fact that, this entire InVIT structures that you have, they're heavily, heavily regulated under the InVIT regulations, thereby leading to, a heightened degree of corporate governance. And, owing to mandatory disclosures that are there are sort of penalties that are prescribed under the InVIT regulations, professionally managed. So it becomes all the more safer and a lot more comforting for investors to invest as well. It was well spoken earlier that you have a 90% mandatorily distributable norm, right, which gives me or the investor a certainty of regular payments throughout. Therefore, it becomes a very attractive proposition for the investors. For the lenders, given that these are largely higher rated assets, it's always welcoming for them to sort of invest. Now, over the last few years, since the very inception in 2014 of these InVIT regulations, there have been various representations and issues highlighted to the governmental bodies, after which various amendments were made to these InVIT regulations, which make it all the more attractive as of today. Be it in terms of increasing the leverage limits, reducing the trading lot and the minimum subscription, right? And of late, even the RBI and the RDA, everybody sort of come into the fray to really bolster this this structure forward. That said, I mean, these are the happy things that everybody's spoken about, and you'll find that in the book as well. There were a couple of risks that Namrata pointed out in her slide earlier, right? And those are well taken. But over and above that, what I want to sort of bring to the table right now is that while, right, InVITs, I mean, they sort of, reduce your risks, that pertain to the construction stage of your assets, owing to the inherent nature of, InVITs that invest primarily into operational assets. However, what you need to sort of, really appreciate is that the risks that are there at the operational stage of these, solar assets or wind assets, right, they still continue to a great extent, right? Be it your payment security, the usual risks that would be there in your operational stage. Now, even in terms of, let's say your approvals and permits, right? That's something that we generally look at when we do due diligences for your solar assets, your wind assets. Now, we'd found that, for instance, I'm just giving an instance, that under the Electricity Act, for instance, right? You have your tariff orders that are either given under 62 or 63. And there's also that, the DISCOM procurement order that eventually comes under 86(1)(b), right? Where the procurement tariff is actually blessed. Now, when we did our due diligence, for instance, we'd go and we'd ask them, give us the approval under 86, that's very important, right? And obviously, I mean, we'd get a lot of these developers saying, we haven't received that because there have been some disputes between the DISCOMs and SECI or, so for whatever, various reasons, those approvals wouldn't have come. Normally, this would have anyways been a red flag issue in our due diligence report, for which we would advise mitigative strategies such as, a CP for that. A condition precedent would be a mandatory requirement before you even move ahead with the transaction. Now, this becomes all the more important when it comes to, InVITs, because without the procurement of that tariff approval, the enforceability of that PPA could be challenged in the first place. And InVITs and the managers and the players within the InVIT diaspora, they have an added responsibility to ensure and check as the duty bound, right, by the InVIT regulations to ensure that all the project contracts at least are enforceable. Last thing, just a thought here is that today we sit, at this forum, this workshop, to discuss clean energy, right, and how InVITs can really, bolster this entire sector. However, InVITs now, they cater to infrastructure. And infrastructure is a defined term, right, which has its linkage to, some harmonized master lists that the Ministry of Finance came about in 2017. From an energy sector standpoint, they largely cater to generation, distribution, and transmission, right? And clean energy as a term, right, in the absence of any well-defined standard, right? And I mean, it's a very fluid concept. And there's been a huge shift in the definitional paradigm, right, of the term clean energy because, I mean, there's no concrete definition of it in the first place. So while to sort of really bolster clean energy as such, right, you have newer avenues such as green hydrogen, right, and other newer technologies that will come in again. So if you really want to achieve clean energy, right, through InVITs, then perhaps the definition of infrastructure will have to be widened and will have to be, keep on being updated to cater to the new technological advancements.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Samvida. Very useful pointing out about the risk. We have a lot of learned people here, and I do want to, open the floor for Q&A. John is leaving. Thank you, John, once again. Much appreciated for taking time. So please feel free either to raise your hand. We have also given a small slip if you would like to write your question. I see your hand, sir, but let me just quiz the panel on one or two questions and then I'll open the floor. Parin, you talked about distribution companies and taking the point about the risk PPAs, etc. Samvida was talking about. How did you guys, ensure the AAA rating? What kind of structuring or strategies you deployed will be very useful to know.
Yeah, so the rating rationale is available in public domain, but very, very briefly, it wasn't very easy. The rating agencies were very, very conscious about our mix, the portfolio mix that we will eventually have. They did, because we were a new InVIT, they did give us a certain period of time by which we have to achieve a particular portfolio mix in terms of a balance between central government PPAs and state government PPAs, or let's say good and not so good PPAs. And their definition of good and not so good is their discretion, which is where, and it's very straightforward. They look at payment history, they look at not only about, at what point in time the PPA was kind of implemented, are there any payment security mechanisms, etc., etc. So they have their own way of doing this, but that was one big factor in achieving the AAA. Second most important factor was with respect to leverage. Now the InVIT regulations do not allow you leverage over 49% initially, and after you finish 6 distributions and you are AAA, then you can go up to 70%. Then that 70% is of your AUM. There have been restrictions that, and it's all in public domain again, on the kind of leverage we can take even after the 6 distributions. So we've kind of agreed to those kind of things. And within that, obviously, there were other covenants which a typical lender would ask for in terms of your coverage ratios. And what we have also been asked to consider is coverage ratios on a cash basis. So while our leverage is anyways going to be lower, but a coverage ratio on a cash EBITDA basis, which is, it's only on the money that you receive and not on the money that you book, or the revenue that you book. Those kind of coverage ratios were also stipulated, and which is also what we've accepted. And this is not sacrosanct. I mean, the way this will work is as the financial health of the DISCOM or the payment track record of that particular DISCOM improves, or as our portfolio mix develops, these conditions, which look to be slightly stringent to start with, will eventually get relaxed. So given we were the first InVIT, no one wanted to really, so it's like a kite. You first just hold the thread and slowly you kind of release it. So that's what the credit rating agencies have done, that it's initially a bit stringent, but as we move along, as the portfolio grows, as the portfolio quality develops, they will try and, we hope and expect to have certain relaxations.
Thank you, thank you. George Washington once said,
sure, sir.
Yes.
Sir, the InVIT strategy, the initial set of assets that the InVIT acquired were operating assets. So we got...
You acquired operating
Yeah, so Virescent's current entire portfolio, we have 500 megawatts odd operational, is all acquired. So we don't develop assets as a strategy. So these were operating assets on which we were raising certain debt, and on that debt, they've rated us. Yes. So if, again, it's different for a bit long answer, but yes, there is you can do some portion of your total AUM as under construction.
Okay.
And within that, we have our own strategy on how much we will do. But the regulation is there. Now, for private listed entities, it's different. Private listed InVITs is different. For public listed InVITs is different. But yes, you can do. And within that, we have our own strategy on how much. We will predominantly do operational assets, and there's some portion over a period of time we'll look at under construction.
Thank you. Broadly, in InVITs, 80% have to be operating assets.
Before you ask a question, I request if you can kindly identify yourself. That will be helpful. Thank you.
So I am AM Jha from SJTM.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So, okay, let me open the floor for questions then. If anyone has a question which is written, please send it across. Otherwise, please, I see a hand at the end. Yes, sir. So I'll come to you next after that question.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Gaurav from Renew. So thank you to the panelists. I think it was good to hear. I think particularly my query is to Pareen and Harsh. I think it would be interesting to note how do you set and manage investor return expectations in an InVIT structure where you're limited by leverage, a AAA rating, and particularly from an investor standpoint when they have an alternate structure where perhaps these limitations are not there. So it would be interesting to see how do you manage that.
Yeah, I think I'll not use the word manage. I would rather say, say what's deliverable, right? What's possible. And as long as you're truthful about it, you may take 6 more months to get the right kind of investors, but it'll be more sustainable. I'll elaborate on what I mean by that is, there are certain things, as you rightly put, you have leverage restrictions, we can't put more than 10% of capital in development, but all that is coming towards an end goal, which is to offer predictable, stable business to the investor. Right? Now, as long as the investor is convinced that they want to invest in predictable, stable investment, and the issuer is convinced that I don't want to missell and I want to sell what is actually possible, you'll have a great journey ahead. There have been experiences, not just in India, across the world as well, so no discredit to anyone, is that people try to missell on either side, right? The investors will try to take advantage of time, lack of liquidity, not many players in a particular market, etc. And then the issuers will try to sell a story which is not going to be actually reality 6 months down the line. And in either of the cases, what ends up happening is there is a mismatch. So instead of managing investor expectation, it is absolutely important to stay true to yourself or the business and find the investors who are aligned to that vision. And that's absolutely important for InVITs especially, because while it is equity in terms of listing and every other aspect, but the liquidity is of different kind, and therefore if you get 2 wrong investors or 1 wrong investment, the cost of exit is very high, not just in terms of value or share price, but in terms of reputation. Right? And as you see, we had an experience of one of the first InVITs that got listed with a different story, which we believe was not the right story for InVIT. And then we struggled, all other people struggled for 3 years in explaining that not every story is a similar story. So don't manage, say the truth, and look for investors who have the right vision for the company and the business. That would be a better approach.
You want to add something, Pawan?
In fact, the way to put this is that there are different investors for a different set of return expectations. Now, infrastructure as an asset class is a range-bound return sector, operating assets. Now, just adding to what Harsh said, you need to get the right set of investors who are looking for those kind of returns. Now, there are other options available, but then there are other investors for those kind of options. If you're doing a development platform, for example, right, with a lot of growth, okay, then, and the investor is coming at an early stage, his expectation of return is going to be significantly higher because he's taking a lot of risk alongside the developer or the issuer in terms of building that platform. However, if you're trying to get investors in an InVIT, IndiGrid is a very large platform, we are very small still. But if someone's coming into IndiGrid today, his expectation of growth cannot be the same vis-a-vis a similar platform, but which is into development. So it's risk adjusted, and there are different kind of investors. And in the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've seen these kind of investors coming into the InVIT.
Thank you. We do have some of those investors in the room, you know, so IVIDA is in the room, I know. IFFC is also in the room, so if they want to, you know, ask a question, I would welcome that. But sir, you had a question, please go ahead.
Question come observation. I have been the biggest fan of InVITs in India, and I have recommended it to all my family members. All my family members are invested in InVITs. All my friends are invested in InVITs. But despite of that, the awareness about the InVITs and the depth in the market, I don't think they even have 1% of the total market capitalization. You would know the exact figure. How much is the total market capitalization of all the InVITs, be it Embassy REIT or Brookfield or IndiGrid or IRB InVIT or recent, it could not be even 1% of the total market. Our total market capital is around $2.5 trillion, perhaps $3 trillion. Correct. What is the share of InVITs in that?
Very little.
And what is the
1 lakh crore is probably the market
What is
cap.
the liquidity? And I'll give you example of yesterday only. Yesterday there was a heavy institutional selling in IndiGrid, and in one day it came down from 148 to 136. So that rattles the retail investors.
Correct.
So we need to create depth.
Correct.
We need to create depth. We need to create awareness. I have met hundreds of brokers. I have met hundreds of institutions and told them, please invest my money into InVITs. And all of them have very happily, merrily feigned ignorance about InVITs. This, I'm talking of established broker houses like Kotak Mahindra and all those kind of things. So biggest problem is the lack of awareness about the InVITs in the people of mind of India, and the effort being made by you guys who are the biggest beneficiaries of the InVITs and the government. So InVITs is a very, very, I say, something, it's only for the people who are sitting on ivory towers. 99.9% of the investors in the stock market do not know what is InVIT and what does it mean, what are the risks, what are the returns. That is the biggest problem. We need to have a depth. So I bought IndiGrid at 148 3 days ago, and yesterday it came down to 36. It rattles not a person like me, but a person who is a normal investor, it rattles him. What is happening? Is it safe?
Correct.
So that is how we have to dispel these kind of myths and educate the investors about this.
Yeah. No, you are right. In a way, you know, the supply needs to lead off, and that's where I think these conversations.
So I think there are many aspects of it, and I think well articulated. So starting with, I think depth comes from liquidity comes from lot size, and fortunately after 3-4 years, just about a year ago, the lot size came to 100 rupees or 1 unit, so a normal investor can buy or sell. So let's go back in terms of evolution. Mutual funds were introduced in 1995. they still need to do advertisement, mutual funds sahi hai, right? After 25, 27 years, and they still need to do that advertisement, and the penetration is still like 2% of financial investors in the country. So there is an evolution of any financial investment. It's on a path for depth. Second, unfortunately, what has happened is that, as I kept going back to the regulatory side, that different people having different views. Well, it's moving, but it's not moving as fast. Again, coming from central government perspective as well. So from every direction. So what is needed for depth? More liquidity. More liquidity needs more supply and more number of investors being able to participate. We can conduct as many seminars for educating people about InVITs. People won't come if they can't invest. Right. So it's extracurricular. So to get to the real masses, what needs to happen is a lot of intermediaries need to be educated. Today also mutual fund indices 50% and more get sold by distributors. Right? Now they will not sell anything that doesn't give them a commission. Right? Simple as that. So that value chain is not being incentivized enough to work. Rather, I would say disincentivized. And that's also coming from the policy of SEBI and MOF, unfortunately. So very small nuanced things which is holding up. For example, ETF. So probably all InVITs and REITs which are listed meets requirement of ETFs. But they are not included in indices, which assures a passive cash flow and where a lot of liquidity comes.
They are not counted towards cash margin also.
Correct. The reason being,
These are counted as cash margin.
exactly. The reason being that mutual funds don't want them as part of indices because Government of India is still applying debt taxation on InVITs. So it shakes the entire mutual fund model. Government of India is not changing the taxation structure to equity. So in between the regulators, what ends up suffering is the overall liquidity. And in the overall scheme of things, it's small. I mean, 1 lakh crore is relatively small in terms of overall liquidity to really move the dent, to really shake the system. But if really government wants to attract more capital, etc., eventually they'll need to make these changes to, make it simpler for people to have more liquidity. The last point on this is also a little bit of confusion from what InVIT stands for and what government should do. For example, I personally, and not talk about company, is a staunch believer of not having government-sponsored InVITs. Because the whole purpose of InVIT is monetization and creating liquidity. And government's business is not supposed to be managing operating assets. Unfortunately, mini PSUs are getting created under big PSUs. Now, what that does is creates more and more classes and fragmentation of the overall investable universe. Instead, the same assets could have been monetized in 50 other ways which would attract more capital, faster capital, because at the end of the day, let's be honest, people who are putting in $5 billion wants to have control on their destiny of how we are going to manage the projects. But government itself is being shaky over there, this is going away from me, I want to control it in somehow. So it's a mix of all of this, but I would say it's an evolution eventually. It's still early. 5 years, 1 lakh crore is a very big achievement in comparison to what it has taken elsewhere. But we want to still keep pushing the envelope to ensure that more liquidity comes, as I said, that's absolutely required. The incident that you mentioned is very important. Well, it's public, but it's lack of liquidity. If somebody wanting to sell 60, 70 crores and the price corrects 3-4%, it's lack of liquidity. And on the other hand, from people who have seen worse, we were very happy that, okay, 60, 70 crore got sold and everything happened, and I bought it, right? So that's personally. So, yeah, exactly. So anyway, so that's about it in a long form.
Thanks, Ash. Mr. Jha has asked a question in a similar context. He asks whether, NPS are allowed to be part of InVITs, or even the 5% AIF portfolio, does it include InVIT? Okay. I don't know, but
yeah. So I think very technical question, but yes. NPS are allowed to invest for sure, Because I know because some of the NPS own IndiGrid, that's how I know. It's a little bit of complicated regulation. Some of them are public managed and EPFO controlled NPS and non-PFRDA managed NPS, the two regulations. So whatever is coming under PFRDA purview is allowed to invest. EPFO, which controls 90% of the capital, still is not allowed to invest, including in government PSU InVITs. So.
Thanks. That answers, I think, your question on what is government's take. I think it answers that. Any questions from this side? There were institutions. I also wanted to bring in Mr. Hari Krishnan, who's part of a large institution. Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, hi. This is Haider from PwC. So I have a question related to InVITs. So we have public InVITs and private InVITs. And I won't ask question on the transmission part because we have revenue assurance kind of, which is regulated, but related to renewable energy. Though there are payment security mechanisms currently created, but still, it's what sir has also said, it's still not implemented properly. So what kind of policy interventions do you think would be required to enable them to be more InVITs to come up in the renewable sector?
Right. In terms of payment security, I mean whether it be through an InVIT structure or not, even otherwise, right? That's a different aspect, which probably, I mean, just by the mere fact of having an InVIT might not really answer that question. However, I mean, MNRE has a fund right now, right, which is over 500 odd crores to allow for such payment security mechanisms. It is well known that the DISCOMs are under heavy debt, to really pay your tariffs at time. But however, I mean, what's been more welcoming of late is that the judicial precedents that have come out of late, say for instance in your Andhra Pradesh tariff negotiation as well, the courts have finally stepped up to say that, poor health of the DISCOMs are not an excuse enough for, DISCOMs not paying the developers. So, I mean, as to where that, delta or the deficit of cash to make better the ill health of the DISCOMs will come from, well, that's a larger question which will have to be thought at a larger governmental level. But at least the judicial precedents and the other, policies that have come about by the government, they do, I mean, bolster and boost up investor confidence. Ki paise to milega.
To give Linda's perspective on this, while processing for InVIT proposal, this is one concern that we have, that we don't have the promoters or sponsors support as readily available in the normal SPV-based financing. The SPV-based financing, for the rainy day, we have at least to fall back on the sponsors. But in an InVIT structure, given the limitations of the lock-in is only for about 3 years. So after that, it's open-ended question. To draw a parallel to the road sector, there are many projects in road sector under the BOT toll model, where in the interim, because of certain reasons, in 1 or 2 years, there will be some shortfall in the toll. And we'll fall back on the promoters will infuse the funds. But such a protective mechanism is not available readily in the InVIT structure.
Please.
In fact, while there is no sponsor support, but to just balance that out, if you are raising money at an InVIT level, you are actually having pari passu security across your entire portfolio and not necessarily you are restricted to one SPV. Point number one. Second, there is cash pooling across your entire portfolio because you are funding at the InVIT level. So to answer your question, if one odd SPV or one odd SEB doesn't pay or doesn't pay on time, at the InVIT level, there is cash pooling. So your lenders, etc., their concerns can be taken care of. And cross collateralization in an event of where everything goes bad is always going to, I mean, that will further enhance your credit standing vis-a-vis debt.
Okay, thank you all for taking that. Mr. Hari Krishnan sir, in terms of this issue which came up, inadequate supply or liquidity in the market, I wanted to ask you, what is the kind of ambition that you have as an institution? You said you want to set up an entity. Do you see, the supply significantly expanding and IFCL playing a significant role?
Yeah. So as far as our strategy for InVITs is concerned, within the vertical also we want to create separate sub-verticals for the different infrastructure sectors. So what is happening is, even as per the RBI guideline, what it says is, although there is a diversification and at the overall level there's a cash flow pooling that is available, but still on the individual SPVs also have to be thoroughly analyzed when we are overall taking a view on the InVIT structure. So from that perspective, this is.
Any other questions from the house? You want to ask something, Anindya? Please.
My question is for.
Maybe take a mic.
So my question is for Harikrishnan sir, and I just want to ask you, since you are having an InVIT strategy, what are the key or the main sectors where you foresee most InVITs coming up, and where does RE sector stand there and why?
So as I mentioned earlier, there has been lopsided asset growth in terms of highways and power. Conventional power as far as IFCL is concerned. So there is a conscious strategy which the board has advised us is to diversify the asset classes into, say, InVITs, bonds, and in terms of sectors to look at coming up sectors like pipelines, hotels, hospitality, and obviously renewables is also there. And we have a sizable portfolio of renewables to the extent of about 15% of the portfolio. And then if you see in InVITs, what happens is those are projects which we fund at the implementation stage. In fact, IFCL has been formed by Government of India, if you say at a more stricter level, not for financing InVIT kind of structures, because we are here to take the implementation risk. So we have to take the construction risk and then bring the project to completion as a partner along with the promoters. So, and then once the construction risk is resolved, then after that it is anybody's game. So that is the primary purpose of IFCL. But from the perspective of diversification, and then we being an infrastructure player and we cannot be away from infrastructure investment trust, so our board has told us that we also need to take at least up to about 15 to 20% in going forward in the next 1 to 2 years. We need to build a book in terms of InVITs are concerned. In the InVITs, if you see completed projects, there are these InVIT structure that we did, as I mentioned, the road InVITs that we did. In that, most of the projects which the InVIT had comprised of were appraised by us, and we were part of those projects during the implementation stage. So from that perspective, for renewables, although we are having a sizable portfolio already, so if these come up for the InVIT stage, obviously we will also participate in that.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Mr. Samvida, sir, now we have some experience of InVITs, has there been any sort of litigation on InVITs, anything to learn from that will be useful to know.
So, interesting to the extent that, nothing that pertained to the to an InVIT per se, on account of it being an InVIT, right, that comes to my mind. But, you need to take into account that all the inherent risks that are there in the operational stage would come to any, SPV, thereby percolating up to the InVIT level. The cash would be, affected, and the distribution and the revenues that eventually get upstreamed there would be impacted somehow or the other. But, in India, we rank somewhere, 163 out of 190 when it comes to enforceability of contract. And we have a very litigative, system. The mindset of people are very, litigative. It goes without saying, because India, I mean, there was a World Bank report that came about, a couple of years ago. This was the report of ease of doing business in India, ease of doing business, where they looked at several parameters that the report has been discontinued since September 2021, if I'm not wrong. But however, the values that you get out of the report are fairly interesting because they went on to say that in India it takes about, about 4.5 years for any litigation to come to fruition, okay? And the cost of, litigating in India is somewhere around 34 cents to $1. Now, and if you were to borrow from the market, let's assume 10-12% at any rate that you take, right? Even without adding interest on interest, without compounding that, you still weigh about 45-48%, right, cents to every dollar that you spend. So, I mean, everybody here, I mean, is sort of incentivized to therefore litigate. I mean, it hasn't really hit the InVIT sector as a sector per se, but there's no coming back from it.
These guys have been doing a great job.
I mean, unless, did I miss something? No?
But let me ask, we have 5 more minutes, so if there are any questions, okay. So you get the priority, sir, please.
I have one question. Can I ask, please?
Where is that? Yes.
Hi, this is Chavi Sharma from Vedanta Limited. I have a doubt, like there are businesses and with increased focus of ESG these days, so there might be businesses who would be operating in not a cleaner business and they would like to shift to a greener business. So considering that, and they don't want to change their business model, so do we feel there is a need to, relook the leverage values, like currently the 49% limit or 70% limit or the credit rating limits? So should there be policy change, or the government can look upon these things while businesses carry on with their original business model, and at the same time they can venture into renewables? The policy change may be only for the renewable InVITs or something like that.
So I mean, just to understand, if there's a business, right, which has already ventured into several, renewable businesses as well, and it has other, diversified businesses as well, the whole purpose of making this entire InVIT structure, more attractive to you would be then to hive off the entire, the renewable, assets that you have into another entity called the InVIT, and then, may make that more attractive, right?
I think that if I understood the question, your question is currently you can't do that because of the leverage and other restrictions.
Right. And
with the entire boost to the sector, can something be done? Straight answer is yes, but everything will have its path. InVITs also need to further mature, fairly young. Depth needs to be created, more and more InVITs needs to come. Stability needs to be there for these things to get relaxed. We don't expect anything to happen in a hurry. The reason why these leverage caps, etc., were kept in the first place is because historically infrastructure companies kind of bit stuff that they could not chew, and because of over leverage, etc., a lot of infrastructure companies didn't do as well as they should have, and that's why when the InVIT policy came in, it came with certain restrictions. So eventually, yes, but
to add, I think it. I've been personally working very hard to reach to the 70% leverage, and to be honest, India is not a place to remove regulation. If let's say 70 is removed, we'll see some disasters coming in 2-3 years, which will impact the overall sentiment towards the sector, which we have seen over the last 2 decades, and we are still recovering from there. SEBI did agree to 70% leverage if you maintain a rating, but rating, what does rating say? Rating say it's stable. That's why, right? Now by saying that, okay, make it AA, what are we saying? Please lower your standard of lending so that equity investors can make more return. Probably that's the underlying statement, which in an unlisted InVIT, SEBI is okay. There are no limits whatsoever. But in a listed InVIT, where there is possibility of public capital, whether by an insurance company, mutual fund, retail, pension fund directly, SEBI has one managers have liability, but SEBI has a liability to ensure that accidents don't happen. I don't see they agreeing to reduce AAA to AA as a requirement for 70% leverage, because that's absolutely against what they've been trying to do, which is make InVIT safe place to invest. And by reducing that, they're making it unsafe to invest. Now, having said so, as Pareen has done it with Virescent, there are ways around to still achieve a AAA and enjoy cost of debt, maybe not at 70%, maybe at lesser, but that is not the policy change. That is rating agencies getting comfortable that renewable sector exposure can be at 70%, which means the sector needs to go to transformation. Eventually, let's recognize today, whether it's renewable or transmission, that these AAA entities are thriving on the poorest of poorest consumers, right? Which is BBB. So it is, if I can use that, it is a kind of 2007-8 jargon, a AAA tranche of a subprime mortgage, okay? Which is extremely high level, well protected, but the customers are still BBB because nobody has got credit rating to pay. Maybe obviously few states do, but so in that scenario, I don't see rating agencies relaxing it unless and until there is tremendous transformation in the power sector on the consumption side, state of DISCOM improves sustainably, then we'll see none of this becoming a problem, right? You can leverage 70% and still be AAA.
Thank you. There's a question. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Abhinav. My question is to Harsh. You're coming from a developer to an InVIT side, right? You're staying with Sterlite earlier. Whenever you bid for infra projects, you have a certain return expectations, like 12% or 13% generally in the end market. When you convert into InVIT, there are certain costs that you would have to bear on an ongoing basis. Like, for example, compliance cost, it has to be Ind AS, the distributions have to be on cash distribution rather than based on dividends, and multiple compliances. So have you actually seen the compliance cost eating into your returns, or is it a very small portion, doesn't really matter?
So it's extremely low. Okay. So again, depending on how you look at compliance cost, so compliance cost to start with, let's say listing fees, SEBI fees, etc., board fees, it's very, very low. Now, depending on what you set out to build. Okay. Now, many of the InVITs developer platforms cross-subsidize each other, and therefore you will see InVIT being run by 5 people,
right?
Which is not the reality. There are 500 people who are running it, but then the cost center belongs somewhere else. So there is some kind of cross-subsidy happening. If truly independent InVITs come into picture, let's say, for example, in IndiGrid's case, today we're truly independent, there's nobody cross-subsidizing, then there needs to be reasonable amount of fee, and I think IndiGrid charges reasonable amount of fee, and we are okay with that. This fee is still lower than mutual fund fees, lower than any private equity fund fees, and we are still okay with that. So to answer your question, cost of running a good platform is not very high. Let's say in our case it is 1.75% of EBITDA, including GST, 2%. So you're paying 1.5–2% of the revenue to manage independently, professionally, kind of thing, is not a large cost, which is about 20 bips of asset value. Mutual fund, you end up paying 50 bips as just expense ratio, largely. So substantially lower.
Right, okay. So basically, because there are a lot of developers now across renewable energy and also in the transport sector who now want to convert into InVIT. So when we speak to these developers, they often have this issue. Because, for example, when Pareen mentioned that you always started with a InVIT mentality. So you always had your books and proper accounts. You were always doing Ind AS. Now, when we speak to developers, a lot of them are actually doing GAAP. So even to conversion into Ind AS, that's a big issue for them because they don't know how to, they don't understand it. And they said, okay, I have to actually do all this stuff for the past 5 years. Guys, is this really worth it? Yes,
it doesn't cost much, right? Yeah. To convert your accounts. And see, Ind AS got implemented 2017-18. All of us went through the journey, right? Whichever company, small, large, big. It doesn't cost even a crore to convert your 5 years account into Ind AS. It's about willingness to do it.
Right.
You may not be able to do for 5 megawatt plant, understand. But then for even 50 megawatt small portfolio, it doesn't cost much.
Right, okay.
I don't think it's about cost. It's more about, is it a time consuming process? Maybe yes. Will it take anyone 6 months to 1 year to get there? Yes. But then if you want to go down the InVIT path, you have to start somewhere. I mean, compliance or managing all of that, I mean, it's a very small cost in the overall scheme of things.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Yes.
And huge restriction in case of the fund raised through InVIT?
Yes and no. When we do IPO, there is specific use that one needs to give, and any other subsequent capital raise, which you cannot misuse. If you have extra fund after that use, you have to refund to investors, a complicated process. But typically, most issuers will have a variety of fund uses, broad level mentioned. So yes, there is restriction, but it's flexible enough for us to give guidance that these are the three things that we want to do. Repayment of external loan, acquisition of projects, something like that. And as long as you comply with that, it is okay.
No, my simple question is, once we have converted our operational assets into InVIT and raised funds, then can we use it for our construction projects, upcoming construction projects?
Yeah, so because you have sold your assets to the InVIT, that's a different company. So what the sponsor has realized is free cash. Whatever you want to do, you can do with that.
No, absolutely. So recycling of capital is one of the primary objectives to have an InVIT.
That is what you call monetization.
Yes.
Okay, nice. Thank you.
Yes. We are already over the time, but yes, I'll allow 5 more minutes. You know, I know you all have been very generous with your time. So,
like in transmission, InVITs are very safe because the payment is guaranteed through the regulation. You don't have to run through the discoms to get your payments. And whether energy is flowing in that line or not, you get your money. But in the case of renewable energy, there is a huge performance risk also. So the degradation of panels and the heat coefficient of the panels and all that is something not very well known. No solar projects have completed in India 25 years so far. So that risk is always there in the case of renewable. So do you see it as a impediment in the case of renewable energy InVITs, or is there a way to find out a solution? And suppose I am given a choice between investing in a transmission InVIT and renewable energy InVIT, I will definitely seek 2% risk premium over renewable energy InVIT while investing as compared to the transmission InVIT. So that's how do we resolve this, or how do we bring down the cost?
I think you're right. I don't think we need to resolve it. To be honest, there are different sectors with different mechanisms, and transmission in one side is safe in terms of collection, cash flows, no demand risk, no price risk. But renewable also has a fair amount of track record in India now with 15 years operating, and there has been delays, but majority of the technical parameters which were thought about are performing in most part of the countries. Maybe 1 year, 2 year people have undersold this, but overall as a country it's performing well. There would be a difference of risk premium. I think we have seen that. Should it remain, should it not, is a future thing. But as you rightly put, there is already a risk premium difference that is there. But the bigger thing in renewable is also happening, the amount of capital chasing it now, considering the global compulsion to really follow that. So maybe on paper, there needs to be looking at theoretically a bit of risk premium, but the asset price is also a function of how many people are chasing it. And considering the global capital happening, we are seeing things happening at, at a equal price of transmission, even lower than risk than that. So it's a unique scenario. But I think as long as people factor in risk premium, that should be okay. I don't see. I would just give one distinction where renewable wins over transmission is, I would say, operating risk. Well, it looks more moving part, more things, etc. But in transmission, let's say even with our size of portfolio, we have got 50 revenue generating elements, which means 50 lines of substation. Something keeps happening across the India. You see some state road guy broke the thing, some flood happened, something. Well, the contracts are very preventive, but if even your one line fails on its own, you have an impact of 5% of your revenue, let's say on a given day. Versus in renewable, the revenue generating elements are cells. So you can change string gradually. So typically it doesn't happen that the entire plant is gone. So the shock impact is lesser in terms of renewable. So your variability in terms of operating risk can go down a little bit versus transmission. That's one place where I think renewable is a little more easier to manage and operate versus transmission.
Just to add, in terms of operating a renewable asset, yes, while there has not been 25-year history, there is enough history to predict in terms of different technologies. If you look at cells, if you thin film or PV, and now there are different bifocal and all of that, to predict what should be your degradation, just to take that example, on a long-term basis. And as long as that's priced in, I don't think investors are really going to worry about, and we are talking about within the larger revenue profile, a very small deviation, right? So it does not really materially impact. And with new technology, earlier 5 years ago, you had modules with very small watt peak capacity. Here we are talking about 450 and 500 watt peak. So, correct. So what we are talking about is that is also a sea change in terms of the predictability.
So I think we have come to the close of our discussion. It has been a very enriching, enlightening conversation. I don't think I will do justice summarizing the discussion. I think it was very useful. I do want to convey, our gratitude to all of you for taking time. Really appreciate the eminent panelists this afternoon. Some of you came all the way from Mumbai. So thank you so much. Also, I want to propose vote of thanks, to our honored guests earlier this afternoon, Shri Jagdale, taking time, Joint Secretary, always a busy schedule, Manish ji from Indian Railways came, he said he pulled out of an emergency to attend, so really appreciate. Our colleagues from USAID, John, Anurag, Monali, Purva, thank you so much. We have been talking about investments and we have been talking about knowledge. Benjamin Franklin once said that investment in knowledge pays the best interest. And that, all of you being here on a Friday evening is a clear evidence of that. So thank you to all of you. We really appreciate all of you coming here. And we would love to collaborate on this journey, which we all are excited about, clean energy transition and how to attract more capital towards that. We have a product launch today. I'm sure you all will take some time to go through it. And our team, Sahib team, which deserves the full credit, Namrata and Mayank, for anchoring this knowledge product, and also our team on communication events, Smita, Anindya, Bhumika, and Abhiva, who have been working tirelessly to make it happen. So thank you to all of you, and have a good weekend ahead. Yes. Morali? आ जाओ मैं, yes, come.